Slavery. It's a word we all know, but its history, well, it's huge. It's a global story that has shaped empires and economies for literally thousands of years. The crazy thing is, its consequences are still echoing in the world we all live in today. So, how are we going to tackle such a massive topic? Well, we've got a roadmap. First, we'll go way back to its ancient roots. Then we'll look at how the transatlantic system became something uniquely brutal. From there, we'll dive into the powerful story of resistance, uncover its lasting economic legacy, and finally, bring it right into the present to see how this fight is, believe it or not, still going on. Okay, so where do we even begin? Let's start at the beginning. We need a really clear definition of what slavery actually is, and we need to see just how far back this practice really goes. Okay, this is the absolute core of it. What slavery does, fundamentally, is it strips a person of their humanity. It's a system that legally redefines a human being into a piece of property, something that can be bought, sold, or inherited, just like a tool or an animal. And believe me, this is not a recent invention. I mean, we're talking ancient. Forms of slavery were absolutely foundational to some of the world's greatest civilizations, from the builders of empires in Egypt all the way to ancient Rome, where at its peak, an absolutely astonishing 1/3 of the entire population was enslaved. Just let that sink in. Now, this is a really important point. In these early systems, you didn't become a slave because of who you were. You became a slave because of what happened to you, right? It was a consequence of losing a war, getting into debt, or committing a crime. The idea of tying slavery to a person's race, that was a much, much later invention. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. Let's see how this ancient practice morphed into the most infamous and large-scale system of slavery in all of human history. So you gotta ask, right? What made the transatlantic slave trade so different from everything that came before? I mean, what changed? Turns out there were a few key things. First up, the sheer scale of it. It's just staggering, almost impossible to wrap your head around. We're talking more than 12 million people. 12 million. Captured, torn from their homes, and forced onto this brutal journey across an ocean. A journey most would never return from. The second big difference was a massive shift in thinking. This new system was called chattel slavery, and chattel is basically just an old legal word for personal property like your furniture or your livestock. And that's what it meant. Enslaved people and their kids' kids were legally defined as property for life. It was permanent, it was hereditary, and for the first time, it was tied directly to the concept of race. And number 3, its purpose. You have to understand, this system wasn't just random cruelty. It was a meticulously designed economic engine. It was built for one reason and one reason only: to produce these incredibly profitable cash crops. We're talking sugar and cotton that would generate unimaginable wealth for European empires. But, and this is a really important but, this is not just a story of oppression. No way. It's also an incredible story of human resilience, of survival, and of the relentless, unending fight for freedom. Enslaved people were never, ever passive victims. They fought back, in countless ways, big and small, every single day. Resistance could look like preserving their culture through music and stories, or deliberately slowing down work. It could be escaping through vast networks or organizing large-scale armed rebellions. Every single act was a fight to reclaim their humanity. And all of that resistance, it had an effect. Fueled by these constant acts of defiance and combined with growing moral and political movements, the legal institution of slavery was slowly and often forcefully torn down across the Americas and the rest of the world. But here's the thing. Just because slavery was legally abolished doesn't mean its impact vanished. Not even close. In fact, the economic system it created laid the very foundation for the world we all live in today. This is such a crucial point to understand. The enormous profits that were generated from centuries of unpaid, forced labor, that wasn't just some side story in economic history. That was a primary source of capital, the money, that directly fueled the Industrial Revolution and the birth of modern global capitalism as we know it. I mean, just think about the pillars of our modern economy. Global shipping, right? International banking, even the insurance industry. So many of these huge institutions have direct historical roots in the money, the trade routes, and the wealth that was created by the slave trade. And that brings us all the way to today. Because, and this is tough to hear, abolishing the laws that allowed slavery didn't actually erase the practice itself. You see, today, things like forced labor and human trafficking, they're really just modern forms of slavery. They operate in the shadows of our global economy, preying on the most vulnerable people. And the scale of this modern crisis, it's just shocking. This is not some small, isolated problem happening somewhere else. It's estimated that right now, there are millions of men, women, and children trapped in these conditions, and it's happening on every single continent in the world. So, this all brings us to our final and maybe the most important takeaway from this whole story. You know, understanding this long, painful, and really complex history is absolutely essential. It reminds us how these systems of power and exploitation are built, but it also shows us how they can be dismantled. It proves that the fight for basic human rights is an ongoing story. And that leaves all of us with a pretty big question. What role are we going to play in the chapter that's being written right now?